Happy Mother's Day, everyone, and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host, as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined by Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp, Nicolò Grasso, and special guest Steven Adam Renkovish to talk about Darren Aronofsky's Mother. Released back in 2017, Mother was a highly controversial feature that got a wide range of reactions. While some people think it's absolute genius, some people think it is a complete waste of time and a piece of cinematic garbage. Today, we reflect on the film 7 years after release to discuss our relationship with the film, how we view the film, and our reaction to how Darren Aronofsky handled himself in the release of the film, specifically in his press release he gave during the Venice Film Festival, which explained what the film was about. We deep dive into how this film was instrumental in the genre it belongs to, and we discuss where we fall on the spectrum of if we think the film is great or terrible. This is going to be a spoiler-filled review, so if you've not seen the film and for some reason you haven't been spoiled about it yet, we would recommend you definitely see it ahead of listening to the podcast. But regardless, let's get to our review of Mother.
We spend all our time here. I want to make a paradise.
She redid all of that, every last detail. And she breathed life back into every room.
Are you happy?
I love you. Please, come in.
Hello.
Hello. He's a stranger. We're just gonna let him sleep in our house. Hello.
Hello.
Did you know he had a wife?
Okay, to start our deep dive into Mother, Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you first, Mr. Editor-in-Chief. Take us away. This is a big task starting out this conversation, but I believe in you. Take it away with Mother.
I would classify myself as an Aronofsky stan, if there's such a thing. I've been a follower of his work, probably post Pie, I'd say, which is his debut. So I've been there for a long time, and he's always kept very similar themes, but he's broadened the scale and the scope of his productions. And I remember when this came out in 2017, because, and not to push the boundary here, right? But there's going to be two major conversations here. One is going to be about the film, and the other one is the ramifications about this film, because this has major ramifications, A, in the industry, and B, with other filmmakers, namely a certain Martin Scorsese, which, if anyone had that on the bingo card, hooray to you. But I've been a big fan of this film ever since it came out on Day Dot. Mass controversy, which I think is misaligned to what the actual substance is. Very clearly allegorical, which is Aronofsky to a T. There's very little there to even to debate. I haven't seen this in a long time, maybe since 2017. Maybe my Letterboxd review is from the Day Dot. And watching it again, my first note was controversial ? And before we got half an hour out, that was clearly answered. This holds up horrifyingly well into the fact that I still find this to be ultra sickening, ultra entertaining, and ultra horrifying, which is interesting, Aronofsky's work, because to me, he's a director of visceral thinking. This is heightened visceral attack. It attacks every sense possible. It's probably the start of people accepting Jennifer Lawrence as an actress again after Winter's Bone, which is a gap of maybe 4, 5, 6 years after doing the X-Men stuff. Actually, maybe even a 10-year gap. Winter Bone, which is 2009, I think, or maybe 2010. So there's a lot to talk about here. I really like this. Looking back on it, I think this is both an audience film and a filmmaker's film as well. There's so much to discuss. So I don't want to go too much into it because it's going to be fascinating. But for a second watch, almost a decade on, 6 or 7, 8 years, this was still horrifying, still impactful. There's probably a bit to talk about in things I think there's a little bit like, oh, okay. But this is like a seismic film to talk about within the medium. Sorry, so I'll let someone else go next. But this is going to be fascinating. I've really enjoyed my rewatch.
Yeah, I'll just say I did too. I really loved revisiting this film. It's funny, up until last night when I was rewatched this and then I was going through our letterbox reviews, liking all your guys' reviews. And Nick, I saw in your review that we covered this on Uncut Gems, like early days of the podcast. I would have put money down. I don't know what happened. I don't know if I suffered trauma to the head. I don't know what happened. I was like, there's no way we covered this. And apparently we did for like a 6-hour podcast. So I didn't really listen to that. But I'm happy that we're back talking about this because this is a film every single viewing. This is my 4th viewing overall that I come away appreciating and loving so much more. I remember seeing it opening night. I was kind of mixed on it. I like it. Obviously, there's a lot to take in, a lot to dissect. I think by the time I went on to Uncut Gems, I was definitely more aware of the context of the film. We definitely broke down like all the details and what it meant. So I see that. But then starting with my third rewatch and with this one, yes, it is horrifying. Yes, I think it's like supremely crafted and precise and just like beautifully done. But there's stuff here where there's just so much to break down, not just in like, I think the take as far as taking the history of religion but putting it through Mother Nature's perspective is like brilliant, and I think that's beautiful, and I could genuinely like almost cry with some of the beautiful moments there, talking about the power of nature and the power of life and whatever you want to call it, kind of that deeper sense of it. But there's so much here, especially on this rewatch, of gender that really stuck out to me, of gender dynamics, gender politics. Quite interesting for Darren Aronofsky, considering his relationship with relationships and with wives, some of the stuff that's in there. There's so much here. And I keep coming back to that this is such a layered text that actually has something to say. I think that's why I appreciate a lot of Darren Aronofsky's work. I don't love a lot of it. I'm not a stan, peace and love. If you want me to go stan mode, check out our Challengers episode on Luca. But like, I do think this is a film that is so layered and so well done, but it has that statement, it has that actual backbone, and it has that substance. To where I just find this very rewarding. And like, while it is horrifying, there's also so many little moments of beauty that is just like, I'm kind of like seducted by this film. I really feel like this is a movie. And I said in my Uncut Gems, because I did listen to my opening statement, I said I would never want to watch this again. I could watch this film any day of the week. This is one of those where like I could go and watch this right now, despite the more graphic, horrifying nature of some of the scenes. Like, I don't know, this one really, I think, has a special place in my heart, and I find that more and more defined with every viewing, as I'm sure we're going to get into on this podcast. Our guest, Adam, do you want to talk about your experience with Mother?
Yeah, I would love to. I saw it when it first came out. I went to the movies with my brother Bradley Andrew, and we went to see it on opening day. And I, judging from the previews, which were, just didn't drop many details as to what we were getting into, I had no idea what kind of an onslaught I was about to walk into. And suffice it to say, near the end of the film, Bradley and I both had panic attacks. Like it was a lot. And so that first experience was incredibly jarring. But then I went back and I saw it 2 more times, and I was definitely able to appreciate the biblical allegory, because I was raised Southern Baptist, so I coming away from that background to where I am now and looking at all of that through Aronofsky's lens was it was a journey, to say the least. It was a very, very just jarring. One thing that really stuck out to me was the sound mix. I love the sound mix in this film. I'm really big on directors who have a strong sense of mood and atmosphere. So right from the get-go, we are immersed in that, and that it just ticks off so many of my little film geek boxes right from the get-go. I love the layered sound mix here. I love the it was shot on 16 millimeter, I believe. So that lends that just lends a very what am I trying to say? It just gives it sort of an authenticity that I think would have been missing if it had been shot on digital. But there are just so many interesting choices that he makes here. And watching it last night, It's been maybe 3 years since I saw it last, and it still holds up. Like it's still just as strong, if not more, than when I first saw it in the theater. Um, so I don't know. Going back to the biblical allegory, I think that Javier Bardem does such a wonderful job just playing this incorrigible deity that just keeps making the same mistakes and expecting a different outcome. And the way that Jennifer Lawrence, the way that her performance, the way that she reacts to some of his decisions within the film, I'm kind of with you, Carson. Some of that brought me to tears. Like last night, I found myself just getting really emotional. And then there were certain parts that I just found oddly funny. And that was the first time that I'd ever laughed while watching this film. So it kind of took me on a different journey this time around. And I'm really thankful for that because I love just the way that films can grow and evolve as we do. And this was a situation where, like last night, I feel like it was the first time I'd seen it. So, and it's just a testament too of Paramount's bravery in this major studio releasing this insane, um, just this cinema of discomfort. Um, and it's just a very claustrophobic experience. How we never really leave mother's point of view. That was one thing that I felt here too was claustrophobia, um, and the elements of Roman Polanski, like little nods to him, even in the promo materials. Um, I don't know. It's just so much. It's so much, and I feel like I'm just rattling off the top of my head right now. But yeah, last night it was a completely different experience for me in a lot of ways, and that in and of itself is just a wonderful thing. So, if anybody wants to add anything else.
Well, Nick, I know you've had a long going through your letterbox reviews. Sometimes you'll have like 4 reviews and you go through them, and every time it's like I've never seen growth on such a you clear scale.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah,
where are you with Mother now? Because I know you've had an up and down relationship.
I have a long history with Mother. I actually saw it. Like, Mother is actually a great movie to look at my growth as a cinephile and a filmmaker, because this was one of the first movies I saw at my first Venice Film Festival back in 2017. And I remember going to it only having seen the trailer, which was like the first teaser. I'm like, what's this movie about? Similar to you, I was like, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. And plus, we didn't know anything. It was the first press screening. And I remember the movie finished. I was almost shaking by the intensity of it all. And I was like, let's go. Let's start to clap. And everyone around me started booing. Like, fuck you, Aronofsky. Woo, boo. First time. And one of very few times I've actually experienced that. I was pretty shocked by it. And it was very interesting because to me, it was definitely a very visceral experience. But as soon as I left the screening, I was surrounded by people like, well, this was obvious, like Cain and Abel and the Great Flood and Mother Earth and like all the symbolism is very dull. How can you not get it? I was like, oh shit, I'm dumb. I didn't think about some of those connections. Some of them, yeah, but others, no. So it was almost a shell shock in that sense. And then revisiting it one more time, I think like later that same year or a year later, at home, it was actually a pretty terrible experience because I didn't set my TV properly yet. And it had like this weird ghosting effect because of the 16 millimeter. And since the movie is almost entirely in the dark, it's very like low light contrast. It was impossible to watch on that TV. That's since been fixed. And watching it both for the Uncut Gems recording and now for this, I really like it. I would almost say that I love it, and I think depending on how this conversation goes between us, I might end up really loving it by the end of it. But to just add on what you all said, which I agree pretty much everything you all said. I want to add to what you said, Adam, about the humor in it. I think Aronofsky's filmography in general, they are very dark movies with a lot of dark humor in them. And Mother especially, I think so many bits and pieces in it are not to be taken seriously or literally. I remember the first time getting into some mild spoilers here, but well, Mother, when Jennifer Lawrence wakes up and she goes like, "Oh, I'm pregnant," like people were giggling in the cinema, And ever since I've rewatched it, I'm like, it's not meant to be like a oh sweet scene. I think it's meant to be slightly funny in its own way, which is kind of like bizarre, but also it has that sweetness. It has that genuine emotions to it, and I think that's a constant throughout Aronofsky's filmography. And I think the biggest indicator that he was trying to make something that's a bit lighter than people give it credit for is the end credits. Because I am 100% positive that when I first saw it, the movie cut to black, directed by Darren Aronofsky, there was no music except for the little like scribbling strings that you found in the first trailer. I was like, oh, okay, and people booing or whatever. And then the movie actually came out for general audiences like a month after, and you have The End of the World playing, which is incredibly on the nose, but just tongue in cheek. And so I'm like, how can you not see this as almost a very sick, twisted joke in its own way? And I really like the religious allegory of it all and the Mother Earth allegory, but also like it as the portrayal of a very, very selfish artist, especially considering, I don't remember who said it, but like considering Aronofsky's own relationships with some of his actresses in the past, and the way he definitely misbehaved and treated them poorly, either a little bit on sets. He's never been abusive, or at least downright so abusive, like David O. Russell, but he has had a lot of very intense sets, you could say, and very rough experiences. And I don't know, I always like when a director into an introspective mode, into looking at themselves, and following Lawrence is a journey that is devastating, that's incredibly frustrating. I think we've all experienced on one level or another just the feeling of you want peace and quiet, and everything surrounding you just doesn't want to let up. Whether it's anxiety, depression, or you're, or in a very literal sense, like you're at your home and people just don't want to leave. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare of two different kinds that we'll definitely get into. And I think I kind of love this movie in its own way. I have some caveats. I do think it lingers a bit too much into shock and misery in the latter part, which fair enough, but I don't know, like the close-ups of just the face getting pummeled. I'm like, that's going into Gaspar Noé territory, where like some moments it just feels like it's just going for the shock, when I think something a bit more restrained might even hit harder. But again, no, I definitely respect the movie a whole lot.
I would just say there were a lot of moments in the film that reminded me of one film that kept coming to mind was Antichrist
Hmm.
as I was watching this. Antichrist, and then just the work of Buñuel, like the discreet charm of the bourgeoisie, and just the absurdity of all of that. But you continue. You continue.
Just to go back when Nick said about relationships, right? Not about Darren Aronofsky. I don't know if Nick will remember this, right? But this film has quite a big moment in our relationship as well, because when this premiered at Venice, Nick was covering it for the first time, and me and Nick were become friends on Letterboxd. We were talking to each other, and this is connected because S. Craig Zala's film Brawl and Stillbot 99 was showing that, and we were talking on Letterboxd comments about it quite a lot, and we were talking about it. And that's how we became friends, because this film was premiering at Venice as well. So it's nice to come back to this. I'll be honest, I have no recollection of that Uncut Gems episode at all, as well, which I think is quite weird. That must be the COVID era, because I just had to look if I was on it, and there's about 9 of us on. But yeah, I just want to go into a tangent here, because I think this has, bar outside of the actual film, inside of the film, forget that for a second, I find this film remarkable in the way that it has a domino effect, and it's probably started in 2014 with Noah, which Paramount Pictures distributes Noah to a commercial and critical, maligned opinion. I don't think it did very well in the box office. It was sort of condemned by multiple religious groups. Aronofsky had to come out with Paramount and state that this was actually his final cut. It was test screened to religious organizations, but this was the final cut. That seemed to cease their relationship after that film, after the critical annihilation that it got. And then Aronofsky goes to Fox, who had produced a backlog of his work. If it not Requiem for a Dream, excuse me, The Fountain, so on and so forth. And Fox take one look at it and say, no chance, not on this earth. which is quite fun with their working relationship with other people. I digress. So Paramount then pick it up in 2016, 2015 at this time. At the same time, they're geared up to produce a film by Martin Scorsese called The Irishman. Silence comes out a year before this and bombs, annihilates the studio almost into two pieces. Out of the two, they then pick Mother because it's got a $30 million budget over a $300 million budget, which is very interesting. They release this, right, and let The Irishman take another 2 years in gestation and go to Netflix, and then to go to STX, which I think a Mexican company then fell out of backing. So it was $190 million they wanted off Paramount. Then Mother comes out with a $30 million budget, but then you've got the marketing and the Fury comes out with. And it doesn't do particularly well commercially. It doesn't do particularly well critically. There's two interests there because the choice to choose what would be nailed on to have an Academy Award feature and to make this doesn't seem like a big risk at the time because you'd think the 30 million. But I think this has actually stumbled Paramount to a degree where I don't think that's the same company as it once was. And I know that because they've stalled with the Star Trek series. I think this film has major repercussions for Paramount. It's interesting because Adam talked about the promo with a Rosemary Baby thing. And I think it's interesting at how this was looked at, because if this came out now, I think this would do bonkers numbers. I think with the era of Ari Aster, with the sort of Jordan Peele, even M. Night Shyamalan, going back to genre horror, and it having sort of a $30 million budget and they're making 50, 60, 90, up to $150 million at the box office. It's a very tidy number. I just think it came out a little bit too early. But the point of the matter is that this could not be sold in any other worse way, because it's left to be enigmatic, somewhat mysterious. And then when you watch it, anyone with an insight into Aronofsky or even into cinema, I think quite clearly can tell that this is an allegorical tale. And I don't think it's a give at all. I don't think it makes the film to be mundane. I just think it's the bread that it's buttered with. I think it's the fibre here. It really is all the package. You've got to have one and the other. But I don't think Paramount could afford to go over the line that they did with Noah. And here you can tell that they don't want to commit. And when it went to Venice, I think me and you, Nick, spoke about this, so I bring it full circle, is he had to make a press release to discuss this film. And I think it's the number one thing you should never do as a creative. You should let the art speak for itself. And the one thing I think perhaps he maybe was forced to do or felt a need to do in order to get the numbers in and not create division as he did with Noah, consciously or not, is he had to talk about what this actually was about, allegorical nature, God nature. I think it succumbed straight away then because people knew what it was about. People were like, I'm done. And it doesn't give that nature of being a visceral, heightened, elevated feature at that point because the emotion, the narrative, it doesn't work as much. Going into this blind is horrifying. Going into it with some knowledge, I think, does dampen it at all. And I think it's interesting to look at this and look at what's come after it with Aronofsky, because he's touched on, like I said, on The Whale, and he's gone back to smaller, intimate films. I can't help but think that this has been a quite seismic film within a lot of people's careers. I mean, Paramount making The Irishman in 2017, would the CGI be available then at that point to do the de-aging? The ripple effect, this is quite interesting, the butterfly effect. But also, just to do a little tangent here, I think this is the first film that started meme culture within cinema. Because because Nick sort of gave it away. I remember on that podcast, very, very briefly, people going, Mother, like it was the meme culture at the time. So I think this has a lot of legs, and it's interesting that no one really talks about it and it's forgotten about because we're in that second windy era of horror. But I think it stands quite tall in that pantheon. I think it holds its own weight. It's fascinating to look at and to look at the context of it and then the surrounding issues. But the one thing I wanted to point out very quickly, and what Adam said, but I think it's very interesting, is Aronofsky's use of the other. He utilizes stars that are remarkably well known within Hollywood. Ed Harris, very well known. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody's seen who he is if they don't know his name. Michelle Pfeiffer, right? Jennifer Lawrence. There's one actor here he uses very pivotally who's got an accent, which is Javier Bardem. who I wouldn't have thought, bar Skyfall 5 years earlier, 4 or 5 years earlier, is not necessarily a household name within the US market, bar he's in the European market. I think it's fascinating that the one person he others in that film is him, the creator itself. I think it's interesting to get into that. I don't know if there's a lot more to be said about it other than it's an interesting aspect. But to make everybody seem the Adam and Eve, the Mother Nature, everything is well known to us. Everything feels norm and calm and cool, collected because we feel a comfort if it's subconsciously. But using Javier Bardem there out of the roster of actors he could have, I think it's very interesting how he predicts the other. But I'll let that go on to anyone else. But yeah, the ripple of this film is massive, really, because the Neon, the A24, it comes at night, come after this as well. Alien Covenant is at 2017 at the same time. So it's interesting to look at horror and where it's gone now. We've got Alien Romulus coming out and stuff. Everything's been brought down a peg after this, which is interesting because this feels like the first one of its kind where scale back, but have great scope. So it was interesting to look at it on a production value, but Adam and Nick could probably talk far better than that than me.
One thing that I was thinking about too, one of the main criticisms that keeps getting lobbed at this film is that the biblical allegory is so on the nose. And I'm sitting over here thinking, well, when hasn't Aronofsky been that, he's always been forceful with his message. He's always taken the sledgehammer effect. And it doesn't make the film any less of an experience because of it. I feel like some people benefit from that sledgehammer effect. And, it really adds something to the film here that a lot of that allegory is so surface level. I've never seen it as a criticism. I've always seen it as just a benefit of this particular experience. And as I was watching it last night, I kept that at the front of my mind as I was watching it. And I always forget that Kristen Wiig has a cameo in this. And I love seeing her in this. Just because I remember when I first saw it, I thought that it would be distracting, but the way that he has directed her in this scene, there's just something really, as with the rest of the film, there's just something so off about seeing her here, and it's really, really unsettling when she takes that one turn near the end of the film during the war sequence.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with that as well, and that's why I think it's more of a disposition to have done that press release in Venice, because it's not like anyone's going to go into this and not sort of understand it. I agree with that. I think you have to sledgehammer this because the tone of the film demands it. I think there's a lot here that you can't undercut it because it has to be quick, it has to be fast, it has to hit you because it's such a momentum at last half an hour, which I think he demonstrates by the exclamation mark on the title. I think it has to be quite furious here. So understandably, there has to be a notion of it has to hit quickly. But I just think that when you look at the press release, and people can find it, it's very well documented. I think it was posted on Variety and Hollywood Reporter as well. Just let it speak for itself, because I think with religious conversation and cinema, it's always going to be very difficult because he's, and like Adam said, it's not something that's been subtle throughout his filmography. I mean, Pi, like if anyone watches that, like he's quite an interesting conversation on Judaism as well, and about numbers and about the Torah and stuff, and then you get to like Requiem and a Dream where they find Christ and over drugs. There's a lot here. I mean, The Fountain is like, I mean, Noah. Again, there's no real sort of argument we have to go here and go any further with it. But granted, I just think I would never do that as a filmmaker. It'd be interesting to know what you think, Nick, because if you've got to describe, let's say not to defend, but if you've got to describe what your film's about, I just think that to me is a dissonance of what the film should talk about. If it's about that religious connotations and conversation, I just don't. I would be upset with you if you made those press releases, because I think that your talent and how you evoke and execute those sequences should speak for itself.
I think there is a benefit in making a press release about a movie where you kind of try to explain it, but also it has to be done in a very specific way. And the way that Aronofsky did it is not the right way to go about it because it's so obvious. And with a movie that's already very clear with its messaging, its symbolism, and all of that, to actually go out and explain it before anyone has seen it, you're putting yourself in the line of fire. Like, people are going to shoot at you because, oh, now we also know what it's about. We don't even need to see the movie before we can already judge it. We judge the way you talk about it. We judge the press release. We judge the way you're in a relationship with the main actress, and there's a whole bunch of other things about that. It's a mess. It's a mess. I think he did the wrong thing explaining himself, but also judging by the reception to it. I mean, people, even very smart people, didn't get it when they first saw it, and so it's a lost cause. It's a lost cause.
What about
I'm
you,
gonna be
Cal?
quite harsh here. I'm gonna be quite harsh here and say, like, well, number one, shout out. I remember, like, this is not as bad as when Charlie Kaufman, the week I'm thinking of ending things, released, and then he made that YouTube video explaining it all and like posted it to YouTube. It's not that bad, but like, I'll be honest, when I looked back at some of the criticism, I looked back at some of the conversation around the film, and maybe this speaks to your point, Jack, about how we've evolved when it comes to cinema and horror and reactions to it. I was like, this is embarrassing how stupid a lot of this is. Like, number one, this one was not hard to understand. It is not that layered. It's not that, like, there's a lot here, but it's very on the nose. As Adam
Agreed.
was
Yeah, yeah.
saying, it's a sledgehammer approach. And I think, like, even the conversation around people being like, oh, it's just religion. Like, there's obviously a deeper context. The point of this film is not necessarily here's religion and guess what? They're talking about religion. It's specifically, in my opinion, talking about the relationship between that and Mother Earth, which again is still on the nose. But so many people going out of this movie and being like, oh my God, I can't believe what I've just seen. Cinema has never been like this. Like, it really does feel like embarrassing to me that the conversation was so controversial. Like, looking back at the film, and maybe this is just me, but I was like, the fact that this got so much controversy, the fact that this got so much conversation, the fact that Darren Aronofsky thought he just needed to say what it was about, like, for me, it just feels kind of embarrassing. I mean, a year later, we're gonna get Hereditary. What, 2 or 3 years later, we're gonna get The Lighthouse. In such a rapid amount of time, and I do think a lot of it is accredited to this film, we're gonna go so much deeper in our understanding of what the genre can be, what cinema can be, breaking down cinema on like a very mainstream level. And obviously, it's always been there throughout the history of cinema. I mean, we talk about Couture like this on our podcast, and he's fantastic with that from like the 30s or whatever, but like, or 40s, 50s, whatever. But like, it just felt like this was such a like exposing film and the state of film and watching film at the time as being so simplistic, as being so just like basic and not putting a lot of thought towards it, to where I'm like, I don't know, it just feels embarrassing to me. I don't get the controversy now. I don't get the confusion. I think this is a film that we can digest, we can talk about for an hour and a half and move on with our lives. That's just me. I don't know. Okay, and quick note, in an unfortunate podcast first, from this point forward, Adam's recording just didn't work. I don't know why exactly this happened, but for some reason, from this point forward, Adam's recording just isn't there. It didn't get picked up. So definitely apologies to Adam, and I'm sorry if some of the editing from this point forward is a little awkward, or if we make like references to what Adam says and you don't know what that exactly is. I'm going to do my best to edit around it, but just know that is why from this point forward, you unfortunately won't hear Adam, including for his retro reviews and question of the week answers.
I just think it's sort of like, again, I'm sort of, I'm sort of in the mix of both of your opinions. I'm more so on Carson's side, but if I had to be damning like you, Carson, if I can have like a minute of just absolutely damning, because I actually find him as a filmmaker fabulous. Well, we won't talk about the recent escapades, but just particularly about this one. I think that by doing that press release, why should I watch the film? If you're explaining to me about why you made it the way it was and the reason why, and et cetera, in the industry that you're in, but also about the social political movements, if you're going to explain that to me before I watch it in a press release at a film festival, you know is going to get picked up. As a someone who's a film fan, I read that and be like, I think you bottled this. I think you know full well that you think that A, this isn't going to be seen by a lot of people, and B, you think this is going to be too harsh for people to watch, or C, it's not as bright as you think it is. And in all three, I think it comes at a detriment of its creator to its creator to its creative project. You're just not letting it live its life. It's like an overbearing parent. Let it speak for itself. If I was Darren Aronofsky, and what a world that would be, I'm sure. Put the film out. Don't talk about it in any detail whatsoever. Go the Lynch approach. I mean, there's a reason why Lynch's stuff, and not to go on an escapade about that, but Lynch's stuff is so quite simplicity, but because it's surrounded in this mystical mysticism, it really does live longer than its approach, and even from like 1979 and 1985 stuff like that, and you go, like Eraserhead and Inland Empire and Blue Velvet, those feelings and thoughts live longer than the feature itself because they're not explained by its creator. They allow the audience to have its interpretation. One part reason for this having that is that it doesn't have legs. I think that's a great degree why people don't talk about this as much, because it's explained. I really would have just let this live its life. Looking back on it, I generally think it's like, I feel partly it's Paramount though, because I remember going far back to Noah and having to read, like in the Hollywood Reporter, and I think it was in Little White Lies as well, that he had to come out and literally say that Paramount have not shown any test screenings to anybody without my knowledge. Yes, they have, Darren. Yes, they will, and yes, they will. Let's be. They're going to show everything to anyone. That's what they do. They want to get the multiple opinions of people, and they'll do it in California, and they'll get multiple sects of religious organizations to have a look at it as well. The most definitely, they do not want any mass hysteria with it. And by doing so, and by them making a secondary press release to state that was not a fact when it quite clearly was, it damns the film to this thing where it's like, oh my God, there must be something really controversial about it. And no, it's not controversial. It's an interpretation of a gospel. It's just interpretation, and by doing the same here and going even deeper into actually explaining it. The one thing I find about the press release quite telling, and I think is for the benefit, is that he stated this, and it's multiple times in the trivia and everywhere. He wrote this in 5 days. Now, I don't know if anyone writes here or writes screenplays or writes journals or writes novels, but one trick about getting your heart on the actual screenplay or on the pages, don't think about it, write it, because you'll find that in the moment you will write from the heart, because your brain won't think about it. It will process very clearly, and it will process like splatter on the canvas. Is that you don't know what you're painting, but you'll get it on there and you'll go from there. Thinking too much about what you're going to write can overly complicate simplicity. And I think writing this in 5 days should actually be a compliment to this feature, because you can tell there's vision here, there's fury, there's passion, there's angst, there's anxiety, and there's confusion. And I think it works wonderfully well in the sort of avant-garde approach of writing for film and then putting it on film. I think that's excellent. Everything else in that press release to me is a stubborn ideology of trying to give your film a bit more weight, but by doing so, I think you've put the lambs to the slaughter, which is unfortunate. But I mean, 2017. I mean, you dare to think now? I just don't know who would do that. Imagine. I mean, Ari Aster with Beau is Afraid is another one. The reason why I know you don't like it, Carson, but like he's been asked multiple times and like critic views and stuff like that in interviews, what is it all about? And he's like, well, I'm going to let it speak for itself for a while. And he says like it's a Jewish allegory, which I think is probably about as simplistic as he needs to put it. And I think after that, let it speak for itself. And I think that film will have major legs in the next decade or so, because he's allowed it to grow, to plant and grow. Mother had a stunted growth, and once you get a stunted growth in a film, it's very difficult for a populace or a revision sort of approach to something, especially from a filmmaker that Adam, Nick, and yourself, Carson, said who's critically and commercially quite revered within cinema. Aronofsky's not a one-hit wonder. He's made dents with The Wrestler and Black Swan. He's made dents. So this is not a filmmaker who's going to go away. But by doing so, then you don't look at that filmmaker for a cult classic. So it's that combination between where I think it's between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, and it was very interesting. I watched for the first time the behind the scenes featurette called Downward Spiral, which is not amazing. Like it's very bog standard, kind of generic. But there's a it was very interesting to see like the early process of the movie, where I think Matthew Libatic said that the actual screenplay that he got at the beginning was like 75 pages, and it was a mixture of also like diary and essay. So I would really love to get a read of that, of what Aronofsky
Wow.
wrote, like in a feverish pitch in 5 days, because it sounds very interesting, and it all developed into like a 3 month rehearsal process that was basically like Dogville, just this empty warehouse with the entire house just sketched on the floor and the characters moving around and doing some camera tests. It's honestly, I would love to have just the movie edited like that, and to get the screenplay like the first version with the essay and whatnot, because it's such a unique creative process that you really don't see, that is not really talked about openly that often because of the stigma behind it. I completely agree with what both you said, like Jack and Adam, that when the movie came out and he said this thing about like, oh, I wrote it in 5 days, and I was like, well, you can tell. It's like, what's I mean, poor guy. What did he do to you? I mean, it's not a bad script. It's actually the opposite of that, especially rewatching it. What you said, Carson, I already picked it up the first times, but kind of trying to detach myself from the religious symbolism, Mother Earth, whatnot. There's so many moments of just very awkward human interactions, and the gender dynamics of like husband and wife, man and woman. He keeps putting things in her mouth that she doesn't mean. She's always put on the sideline. She's trying to fix everything in the house, and people don't listen to her. Like it's such a viscerally frustrating experience that for many to have called this, and I've also seen like fairly recent reviews that say that, oh, this movie is misogynistic because of the ending. It's like, I don't know, like I think there's always this search for some people, that which is very understandable, that your life is such a living hell that you want pure escapism from movies, and to not have this film end with her surviving, with her going on to live her own life. Like I get that the fantasy is broken and there's no happy ending, but also for the work of art that it is, I think it's incredibly fitting and dark, and also darkly beautiful in its own weird way. It's the cycle of humanity and religion and everything. I don't know. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, there's no happy ending because she's like being abused by him, right? Like, I don't know what, I don't really get that criticism
She
personally.
doesn't kill him and stab him in the throat and leave the house and let everyone burn. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is like a remarkable feature for being written in like 5 days. I think number one, as you're kind of getting at, Nick and I mentioned, there's so much context and layers here as far as what you can analyze. But like, I think a lot of the raw, visceral emotion also comes from that. Like, clearly he was angry. Clearly he had a vision. You mentioned earlier the scene where they're beating down Jennifer Lawrence, and it's a very brutal scene. But I think that's like needed, that anger and frustration here. I put this in context with something like First Reformed. Add that to the bingo card if you can
Also
click
at
that off.
Venice. Also at Venice at the same year
Also
as well.
Venice,
Same year, yeah.
where there's just like, when you look at climate change and you look at like the destructive and abusive nature of humanity and Earth, like it's on such a scale, for me at least, and maybe it's just like this isn't within me, so I connect with these films on this deep level. But like in First Reformed, it's asking how do you live with just like the mass implications of what that means and what we've done. This is a very raw and angry look at that. I think this is a wonderful double feature, just throwing it out there. But like, I think that raw, that anger, it doesn't need to be subtle. It can't be subtle. You have to show that this is what is happening. We're beating you down. When we're taking the life of the baby, we're eating the baby. It's disgusting and it's visceral and it's rough. But I think that also comes from the fact that it was written so quickly and so rapidly. Granted, I do think it helps that a lot of the structure of this film is just like history, so you can just like see what's happening. It's not like you have to like, well, what's going to happen next? Oh, I guess we're gonna have people. Like, you're just following history. But which gives it a backbone. But like, I think that emotion comes from that process, where I think Schrader is like this longer meditation. I think Aronofsky really thrives here in this raw, just quick, angry expression. But
Well,
I think both those films work really well.
I'm glad you brought First Reformed up, right? Because I wasn't going to bring this up, but I think it's interesting you do, because you're a Schrader fan, or Stan, should I say? But you look at the two themes.
Stan.
Yeah, Stan, that was it. Yeah, I've never heard of him, but yeah. There's two films, right? And the two reactionary features. One is a very much down to earth, psychological, visceral flavor of there is something impending doom. but it's not at your doorstep. It's there, and it's suffocating, and it's eventually going to arrive, and that's the panic. That's the reactionary panic, is that there's a helplessness by not doing anything. When you look at Mother is set up very similar, but far more intense. That the reactions at her doorstep. So the 5 days, the screenplay is written reactionary. So it's written very much off the cuff. Oh, we'll do this, we'll do that. I think it helps the thematic and the tone of Mother sort of 110% because it's a reactionary type of feature. What Jessica Lawrence or Mother sees is what the audience see, and it's the momentum. It's to a point where it's actually unnerving. It comes so thick and fast. I think it probably demands 2 or 3 showings just to catch things. The little bits and pieces, but because it's so thick and fast and it's so reactionary, I think it does need to have those. And this is what Adam said: the sledgehammer. It does need to have those like hits because it comes so quick at the audience. Whereas First Reformed takes its time over a screenplay. This doesn't have the afforded, which ironically, being like 2 hours long as well. This is definitely a beast in its own right, or at least almost 2 hours long. It does take its time to get there. I mean, at least an hour and a half to build up. And even then, it's reactionary. We go into a room. We know something's not quite right. There's a sense of tone or atmosphere, and something happens that's sort of like not very normal. And these grow and intense to a degree where they become horrifying towards the end. I think the difference between the two is probably the age of a filmmaker and the generation of a filmmaker. I also think gender plays a role in there. These two come at a director who has seen and been in a repressive religious background in his youth, and Paul Schrader, who's at the 70, 80 mark, who has seen a lot more of life. Aronofsky comes from a religious background, not as suffocating, but more sort of expressive, and his filmography rises in a very different type of allegorical term. But the two of them have very interesting conversations or inflictions with God, or at least with religion. And that goes into race and other things and gender. While race is Paul Schrader, gender is most definitely on the cards for Aronofsky. And not to sound like Freud here or get really into it, I'd love to understand his relationship with his mother, Aronofsky, because I think that when you look at this type of film, to put someone through that, you've got to really have the courage of convictions. And I think it's interesting to have a look at his family dynamic and his religious aspect of where this comes from and where this anger comes from, or not necessarily anger, perhaps more sort of excuse me, more so like not like a campaigner, but someone who's like trying to get the message out and doing it through his art form. And then you get like The Whale, though, and you look at things where you're like, I know what you're trying to do here, but you're using the prism of cinema to try tell a very visceral avant-garde story that feels like not only anticlimactic, but patronizing, and also I'm trying to think of the word here where it's like you're taking like a story and you're using it for like financial
Exploiting?
Yes, exploitative. Yeah, that's the word. Here, I don't get it so much because I'm reading about Jennifer Lawrence's creative history on this film. Like, she was like, they asked me about like, do I want to show nudity? And she was like, look, let's just go for it. I'm gonna give this character some depth, but also that it would be a dissonance to not give the character that moment because we need to show how stressful and how horrifying that is. And then obviously you get to Red Sparrow a year later, so she's definitely grown and be comfortable with her body. And look at the backstory of that, and what happened to her was horrifying with something that happened. We don't really want to talk about, but it's interesting that it's empowering for her to have done that. And then you think is that then you have the conversation about the necessity for the character. I do think this has to go there. I do think this has to go to that First Reformed with a bomb moment. This has to push you, and it has to have that sledgehammer. But the problem with that, and I'll stop going on in a minute. I find that with the sledgehammer approach, you have to outdo yourself, and I think it comes at an issue of the filmmaker in that once you get to like 1, 2, 3, and 4, you've got to then find 5, 6, 7, 8 that's going to be even more damning. And I think a really good filmmaker can subvert those expectations, but narratively, because this is going to a crescendo, this hasn't got any subversion. It has to go for it. It has to go for the bang. And I think at that detriment comes things that are horrifying. But I do think with the film, it does feel a necessity. It's interesting though when we talk about Darren Aronofsky with relationship to women, because he dates quite a few of his stars. Sometimes he marries them, and sometimes he has children with them. And on this film is no different with Jennifer Lawrence. Now, I don't want to sit here and give an opinion of it. That's nothing for me to do. And that's why I was interested about his family dynamic with his mom, and just interesting. But I think you've got to have really, really, really close bond to put someone through this. As a filmmaker who's quite visceral, I think you've got to understand what you're writing and know that you've got to put someone in there. I've got to think that relationship helped to be absorbed in that world and to know that she was fine, because she didn't work for a while after this. She didn't work for a while. She took like a year and a half out, which for a start, her height. I mean, there's other things going on as well, which I alluded to before, but that's like big. That's quite massive for an actress of her caliber. And then no, she did another one a few years later when she was pregnant, which is, and then she came back with Anyone But You, not Anyone But You, the Hard Feelings, sorry. But yeah, I think you've got to have a lot of faith in your creatives, and I think having that relationship probably helped. I just hope that doesn't come at a cost of like in the manipulation. But I don't want to speculate on that or anything. But I think you've got to have faith. You've got to look at your actress and actor and like, I'm going to put you through this shit here. We will get out of it. We will have cuts and bruises, but we will after this is gone, we'll all be happy for it. And I think all of them looked at this project and put 110% in. And from that, to know that, like I said, the context of the story, you've got to convince those people, and he must have done a hell of a job to do so.
Yeah, I remember some fun tidbits about like the whole dating Jennifer Lawrence thing. Like during the Venice Film Festival, I had some friends that were obsessed with like getting pictures and whatever, and some of them like saw Aronofsky in multiple spots of like the hotel and everything, and did like they were wanted to take pictures with me. And he was like, "Oh, have you seen Jennifer yet? Have you taken a photo of her? Oh, like she's so lovely. You see, blah, blah, blah." Like he was obsessed with her and obsessively like super cute, like fully in love. But then like I remember interviews like between him and her, and he was always praising her, always talking about her, but also obsessed with the movie. And then afterwards, once they broke up, she was talking about like him and the making of it. And she was like, that was the only thing he could talk about was the movie. Like he became his own like Javier Bardem unwillingly. It was both mother and father. It was both of them at the same time. He was the creator who's finally given birth to something he truly believes in, and he wants people to adore him. But he also was the loving partner, the one that wanted to push the other half and to be like, see, no, don't only focus on me, focus on the other person as well. Which is very interesting thinking about the entire dynamic of the film. That it was kind of replicated afterwards in real life, and ultimately led to the couple dying off after like 5 months, 6 months of a relationship, which started like before the movie's release and ended after the movie's lifespan, basically before the Oscars. It was like January, February, I think. It's fascinating how these things are in conversation, constant conversation.
So you could say the house is like, an artist's like career, and then you have the two sides of the artist, or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Yeah,
Write a feature, get it on Clapper.
No.
It's an interesting dynamic, because it's a very like you understand. I think especially rewatching it, like you understand everyone's point of view in this movie. Not necessarily sympathy, because I think for all of let's call them the human characters, like people that aren't him and her, like overstepping boundaries constantly, the disinterest, the distraction, it's very upsetting. But between the two of them, like I think if you've been in I think like an interesting double feature would also be like this and the Banshees of Inisherin, that shows like the lengths that someone would go to just create good art and cutting off everything else. You almost see the same here. Like he's a very shitty husband. Is not I don't know how to say it in a nice way. Like is not doing his marital duties in bed, you could say. Is not asking her questions, or actually making her part of the couple, making her part of what it means to be together. And he's also very much lost in the previous relationship, in the previous woman that he had. And originally, when I first saw this, I didn't like the fact that it opens with the death of the previous wife. But then over subsequent viewings, I don't know. I've actually taken a liking to the cyclical nature of it all, and the fact that it shows you like, whoa, she's dying, burning up, everything's coming back to life again from the little crystal. It's an interesting structure that plays into. I honestly like. This is what happened to Aronofsky. Like, a relationship finishes, you burn everything with a movie, you start writing again, you start a new one, everything's finally going well. Oh, the movie's released, people hate it, everything burns down to the ground. Start it up again, starting up the process, almost like the process of making a movie in its own way. It's fun. It's fun. I think it's definitely an allegory, which is usually meant to be like, oh, this means this and this means that. But I also like that there's so many other different reasons that can be taken into account for this film, and they're all valid in their own little weird ways.
You said about it has a partnership with the Banshees of Inisherin, right? And I get that, but I think has a far more direct lineage with the Fountain, which is a yellow hue. Then you have Noah, which is a blue hue, and then you have this, which is a red hue. And then you can even probably put Pi in there as monochrome, but forgetting that for just a second and going for the more biblical science fiction aspects of them all. The trilogy is always about like starting again. It's always about in the very much a biblical sense more so than a narrative one with a cyclical nature, granted. But I think thematically, the religious ideology is about rebuilding, about finding faith, rebuilding again. The Fountain of Youth is a Fountain of Youth. That was Pirates of the Caribbean. Then the Fountain is about that idea of reincarnation, finding oneself in different universes or different places throughout time, and finding one another true love, and that the affliction of that, and the positives and also the negatives. And you get to obviously Noah, which is the flooding, and then the rebuilding within devastation. And then this one is very much both of them, although more so on the Noah lens, with a bit of the idea of building up from again. But out of the three of them, it's interesting when you look at the tone, because they get progressively darker as someone ages. The Fountain is quite uplifting, if not poignant and brutal, in that they'll never be together, but they always will be. And when you get older and you find love, and the love fades away, and then you find love again, and then you sort of make decisions in your life and make errors. It's always difficult to watch those type of films. And then when you watch Noah, I think Noah as someone who may have a family or may see that in a different light, but Noah's quite frightening in a sense of having to build, having to leave people who don't register with you, having to cut those people off, to leave devastation, to leave vices, to leave those things alone, and then build up from scratch, which is very scary to do as an adult, very easy to do as a child within reason, but very difficult to do as an adult if you have to leave people who are friends, and leave jobs, and it's quite scary. But when you get to Mother, you get someone who's very, very vicious, very, very angry, who sees the world in a very different point of view. And I think it's growth as a director, probably what he sees in the news, and obviously things that have surrounded him, and stuff like that. But I do see a really interesting growth as a filmmaker, and I'm glad this exists for that, because I really like seeing a filmmaker grow with projects, and knowing a filmmaker who's very one-to-one with a work, who's like heart and passion, who doesn't just do a fucking paycheck, because he was going to do the Wolverine before Noah. Thank God for that, because that would have been I don't know what that would have been. Granted, he was going to do Batman as well in the early 2000s, but I'm glad he stayed away from that and being very true to his purpose, which is, I'm going to reflect what I see around me, and as I grow older, that's going to change. And I like the authenticism there. But I think Mother comes from a place where you see a man who has now has been married, divorced, has a child, and sees the world in a damning verdict of, why are we not helping anything when we have this beauty, we have this thing around it, we have love, we have life, and we're just destroying everything. And probably the sad aspect of that is that looking at that then and looking at that now, it's probably worse. I mean, I'm quite an optimist. People probably say I'm pessimist, but I think that you look at a filmmaker like Aronofsky, who puts the heart and page on paper, and you can see the reflection. I think when you look at it now, it's sort of like, Jesus, nothing's really turned, nothing's really changed. But going back to the film again, I think this is an angry film. I think this is someone who is pissed off. I think this is someone who doesn't want to hold any prisoners, which goes back to the issue of writing that fucking press release. Let it stand for itself. But I look at this and think, this had to be the way it was done. I mean, the 16mm, I know Adam mentioned that, it's absolutely gorgeous. The fluidity of camera here, like you often forget that the intensity of this set, like it would probably look, there'd probably be multiple reincarnations of it, in a sense that it would probably be bigger on some shots, tighter on others, to give that idea of claustrophobia, but still to make this set on a soundstage, I would presume, and to get the intensity and the close-ups, that's still a very hard thing for a filmmaker to do, because you've got to try and negate the feeling of a documentarian voyeurism, and also then trying to make intimate. Two very difficult sensibilities riding on each other. And I think he nails it here. Granted, there are bits where he's like too keen on the neck snap is one where it's like, that's earth shattering, but he probably has to do it because the sound design's all over the place in that bit. But when it's cold in the opening and there's just no diegetic music whatsoever, it's all diegetic music. So you hear the whistling of the grass outside, you hear the floorboards creak, and it's just that. And then we build and build and build. I love that filmmaker aspect where this is an invention that's all about like the filmmaking craft. It's not just being thrown together. There's real thought here. There's real build up. And again, it has to rise. It's like it is like a symphony. It has to rise, and we have to get to the crescendo. And he does it magically. Does he overblow it? Yes. God, yes, he does. And he oversteps the mark multiple times. But there's a filmmaker in there, I think, that doesn't want to sacrifice his vision and has had that perhaps done before him. So again, I know I've spoke a lot here, but I do think it's interesting to see that anger and it to get redisposed into a creative project, and not just someone tweet about it and be like, oh, climate change, let's act now, like Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, why don't you go out and do something like that? Yeah, you made your documentary, right? But like, let's maybe not take a private jet somewhere, like we know another famous artist does, but I can't say their name because someone in this chat will get upset. But yeah, I just think that, granted this won't be carbon neutral at all, but I think to have someone who's quite angry about the world and not to do it in this exploitative fashion of like, oh, I'll just put a tweet on it. Like, go make something. Let your art speak. Let it be so fucking loud that it gets people's attention. And I do think people walk away with this and think, Jesus Christ, like, this is frightening. I wonder what that's about. And then they go read about Cain and Abel and stuff like that, and they go read about, and then they see the allegory and stuff, and they think, oh, I think it's powerful enough to do that. I don't think it resonates throughout all of its audience, but I do think it's powerful enough to even have a sizable chunk at having that, grabbing you by the heart, and you're definitely feeling it. I'll tell you something as well, just to echo that. Just about like the set. I'd love to know what was cut out of this, because by what I realise is there's no deleted scenes here, so presumably this is either like the work print's the final cut. But I'd be fascinated to know what he thought was detrimental to this, knowing what's left in it. And like Anthony, like the choice of lack of score, 16mm. These are fundamental choices that you don't go in after the fact with. These are thought process through. So what he would have thought, well, this is too much, this is too much, this is too much. And if there was a score at one point, because I know he's got a recent collaborating with Clint Mansell as well, so it'd be very interesting to see a work print of this if it was any different. But I agree with you. I think to see this on a sound stage, or at least shot just with the actors in giving it 110% in a studio with no set, just a theatre room, I think it'd be quite powerful to watch that, because there's I think Jennifer Lawrence here is magical as well. Really, really good stuff. But I agree with you, Adam.
Probably her best performance, and I would say definitely one of Aronofsky's best works. The production design, you kind of mentioned it, but like the production design is stunning, especially after she comes out for having the baby and that switch. I just think it's really quite stunning stuff. Maybe we want to start working into some of our final thoughts and kind of wrapping up. Jack, do you have anything else you want to really get into?
Yeah, I'll just to be very briefly to agree with you about Jennifer Lawrence. She's not working with a lot here. She's working with the page. She doesn't work with makeup. She doesn't work with costume design. She doesn't work with other performance. So she's having to give probably an over zealous performance in the aspect of she's having to make up for reactionary about what she sees and make that world up in her own mind. Probably like working with a green screen almost, if you can put one and one together. And she's absolutely magical. This is definitely a film. This is after she won the Academy Award, after working with the man who will not be named, who made Joy as well. So it's interesting that the trajectory she had, and then she was adamant from this moment forward, I don't want to do the big movies anymore. She'd produced Red Sparrow, and then after that, I don't want to do the big films anymore. I don't want to do the X-Men's. So this, I think, is very vital within her career as well to think, I think I can do something here. I can work in the medium to big budget and still not lose myself in the fact of giving performance. But I agree with Adam. This is probably my favorite Aronofsky. There are better, probably well-made films. I think the logistics of Requiem for a Dream is still quite haunting. I think The Wrestler's a fabulous concoction about building back up again from crumbles. I think Black Swan's well done. I think Noah has its limitations, but it's an interesting aspect. I think The Fountain's extraordinary. Pie's brilliant. So there's a lot within his filmography that I look at and I think, oh, this is a really good filmmaker. But undoubtedly, for what this is, and to remind people that he's mad, creative, expressive, crazy again, to make something with $30 million and be like, it can be done, and to make it hit. This is definitely one of those pieces in his filmography. I'm like wow, like I can't do anything but just reward this. I think it's a fabulous concoction of just creativity and must and need and demand from everybody. There's not one person here who leaves here who gave they were good in it. Everyone's quite brilliant. It's like Adam said about Kirsten Wiig as well. That shouldn't work on paper. I think you can probably have detractors there, but how he uses it, how he uses gore, how he uses body, how he uses everything like that, it all feels like a must and a need, but also to have reasoning. And I think that's very impacting, very powerful. And within a filmography that's very dark, probably just takes a notch up. But I just look back on this since we did it a few years ago and since release. I still find this to be one hell of a trip. I don't think I'd take this to the desert island. I think I'd probably have to take something a little bit lighter. But to show anyone how it can be done and how like capturing lightning in a bottle, I think this is a fabulous way to show filmmakers like you don't need to make the $300 movie. Make it for 30. And I'm just glad we're in that wheelhouse now anyway. But this was so fun to go watch again. What a great excuse. So thanks very much for inviting me on, Carson.
Nick, what are your thoughts? Where are you? Are you loving this film now, or like where are you?
Yeah, I love this film now. I think you've all convinced me. I don't know if I would say it's my favorite Aronofsky film, but it's probably the one I would most likely rewatch. Even though I've already seen it 4 times, which I never thought would have been the case back in 2017. But here we are now. I would say like Wrestler and Black Swan are tete-a-tete for the top spot because they're very much both in my wheelhouse for very different reasons. But just the confidence of Mother, the confidence for the type of content that's put on screen, for the way that it's put together. I just love the texture of it. I really like, honestly, this is shy for greatness for me because of the CGI that's present in it, which is very scarce, very scarce. But I think he could have done without. I saw like in some of the behind the scenes footage, you see like all of the puppets that they created, like the robotic baby when they have him at the end, or there's the toilet monster. It's actually called the toilet monster when she goes and pokes the thing in the toilet. It was just bizarre. But like there's all the different like CGI enhanced shots, which are probably like a handful in the entire film. Could have done without them. We don't need them. We don't need them. This is already so tactical and so practical. It's disturbing. I think the entire sequence where you see the worst of humanity with the war and the Ebola and the prisoners of war and everything and the poverty and the zealots, it still gets to me. It's still incredibly intense, incredibly visceral, and that's what cinema is for me. Like cinema is about emotions, and so just the rush of it, and you can intellectualize it, and you can get lost in all of the like, is it obvious, is it not obvious, does it even matter? Like I think what Adam said, and this is the last thing I will say, I completely agree. Like Aronofsky's never been a subtle filmmaker, first of all, but also like 2017 already we were like, oh yeah, global warming, we're destroying Earth. Like this has been going, like we've been aware of this for like decades, but especially for the past decade, like since 2005-ish, more or less. So like, what are we doing about it? And now it's been 7 more years and nothing's changed. It's like you have a movie as obvious as Mother that's meant to be a sort of warning, in a way, in a certain, if you look at it in a certain way. and nothing's changed. We haven't really improved in any way. It's bleak. That's why you cannot have a happy ending at the end of it. It's bleak, but also, second chances. Maybe something will be different next time around. I don't know.
Because he doesn't care, because fuck God, because he doesn't care, and he makes these same mistakes and burns her every time, and he doesn't care. No, there's no good ending.
Just burn it to the ground.
Stop trying to say there's a good ending. The woman's gonna get burned every time. I love this film. I mean, obviously, it's one of my personal favorites. It's not my favorite Aronofsky. I do have The Fountain just above this, which it's wild that out of like all of us, I'm the one who likes the like bullshit artsy films. Because normally that isn't very much so not me. Normally that's Nick. So you're kind of disappointing us today, Nick. But I think this film is great. I think there's so much here, even just today talking about it this many years after release. Nick, your reading on this possibly be, I don't know if it even was your reading or if I just like conspiracy theory put it all together, that this is a take on just the sides of being an artist, of a destructive artist. I think there's so much here to engage with. Undeniably disappointing the time of release, certain contexts surrounding release reaction, both from the director and from the public. But if this came out today, I think it would be a banger. I think everyone would love it. And I think it's destined to be reconsidered and be reanalyzed. I will say, though, I mean, as we discussed here, I think underrated on how foundational this is in a lot of senses, from the people who worked on it to the film community to releases, to the just direction of the genre. I think this is a very important and vital feature to get to where we are today. So I guess as far as a stepping stone, that is good. But I love Mother. I think it is absolutely fantastic. And in 4 years, when I forget we did a podcast on it, we'll be back talking about it again. I'm sure it's kind of like a cycle, it just happens over and over again. So with that, if you want to watch Mother, you can find it at home. It's not streaming, at least in America, on any platforms, but you can rent it and buy it and so on and so forth. Let's get to our question of the week. It is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. We're asking, what is your favorite cinematic mother? Mother, as some would say. Nick, what is your favorite mom in cinema?
I have a tie because, of course, I'm okay. I have a joke one. Mother Suspiriorum from Suspiria.
Wow.
Both Suspirias.
Okay.
Let's go OG. Let's go Guadagnino remake. I don't remember who she is is she still the Swinton? Is she actually Dakota Johnson? I don't know. Does it matter? Not really. Great cinematic mother. No, but actually my answer, I thought long and hard about it, but I was like, it's right there. Going back to the well, to my favorite film, Blue Velvet, Dorothy Valens, the Blue Lady, who's everything is about the fact that she's a mother. Dennis Hopper's Frank Booth is obsessed with her and calls, it's like, oh, mommy, fuck me, mommy. Saying Blue Velvet to me. It's a Freudian movie. It's full of this symbolism. And for Mother's Day, watch Blue Velvet with your mother. I think that's a great recommendation as well. So Dorothy Valens, played by Isabella Rossellini. It's my favorite cinematic mother.
Jack, what are your favorite mothers?
Mine was going to be a Mother Superior and Suspiria as well, just because on that Luca train. I'm going to give two as well. One is obviously the Oracle out of Matrix trilogy, like a wonderful woman who puts everything towards giving advice, tries to parent them. They do what they do, but she's always there. But in general, I had to think about this, and I've gone a bit of a grim way. I've chosen Kristen Scott Thomas and Only God Forgives, because that woman was told cut by Nicholas Winding Refn, and she heard cunt with a capital K. She's so vile in that film. I sort of had to go something a little bit left field, but every time I think about that film, what a terrible person she is, I thought we had to just level the scales a little bit. Everything's been so nice. And then Ma as well, which I think is that a mother thing? I'm not too sure, but she tries to do her best. Kills a few people on the way, and she's adamant about doing it, so I'll give her that. But those are my two. But that was a good one. It was tough, very tough to do.
Genuinely can't believe we haven't had a Ma sequel. If we're getting Pope's Exorcist too, like how do we not have Ma 2?
They're not ready for it.
Well, that's true. We, as a society, are not ready. I have two. Obviously, Donna from Mamma Mia, I think is fantastic. Slipping through my fingers, I cry every single time. But then I think I have the best answer for this, which I don't know if anyone's watched the documentary Italian America from Scorsese, but Catherine Scorsese in that film is the most mother there's ever been in cinema. You just watch that and your heart fills. If you've not seen, it's like an hour-long documentary, just Martin Scorsese talking to his parents and hanging out while they like make spaghetti, and she's there like making her sauce, being an Italian mother, and it's just like, happy Mother's Day. Like it's perfect. It's genuinely just like perfect.
Just every Catherine Scorsese appearance in his filmography.
That's true.
Is just
Carson,
good fellas.
Have you seen where she's on an interview? I don't know if it's Letterman. I don't know if it's Johnny Carson, but she's on there and she cooks the guy and Scorsese himself pasta. She doesn't know how to cook it. Have you ever seen that?
I have not.
No,
I need to check it out.
I think I've seen like a snippet. I have not.
Yeah, she's also, if you watch the behind the scenes of Casino, she's a bit older than I think his father had died at that point, and she's next to Martin Scorsese. I think Joe Pesci's there, and every time Joe Pesci swears, she like hits him. And it's in the film as well, but I think they're rehearsing it. It's really funny. If anyone, I think it's on it was on the Universal Blu-ray. It's really touching because she's obviously at a certain age there, where she's a lot older than the Italian American one, and Joe Pesci's at like he's giving it all. Every time he swears it, she hits him. It's really really quite beautiful. But yeah, that's a brilliant. That's one of my favorite films as well. That's fucking brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you.
You won.
Well. Shout out, Catherine.
Yeah.
You can let us know your favorite mother in cinema on Twitter. Let's get to our rapid reviews. This is our segment where we just end by talking about anything we've seen recently that we've not talked about on the podcast. I will just quickly start. The only thing kind of related to new releases I've seen this week is Spaceman, the Netflix film by the same guy who made Chernobyl, starring Adam Sandler. I think the film is really fun, really good iconography, has a good premise. It's about this guy in space who is going through this breakup of his marriage. He doesn't really know that. His wife is just not responding, and he meets this giant spider who's on the spaceship who talks to him about his emotions and growing up. I think there's an interesting undercurrent here with looking at the relationship between trauma and ego. I feel like that's not a connection I normally see in cinema that this film begins to talk about, but I don't know if it ever really fully goes there. If you're super invested in this character, I think you're going to like this, but I don't know if I ever really hit the nail on the head. I would say it's just kind of fine. I also watched The Contestant on Hulu, which is a documentary about this Japanese reality show where this guy was naked in an apartment, and just like the gimmick was that he had to fill out like contests and magazines until he hit a certain amount. And it was like kind of shitty, a lot of the practices they did, and they kept extending it. And like he didn't think he was going to be like seen. He thought it was going to be edited, but then it was live streamed and he didn't know about it. The first half of this is really great in exploring what actually happened. But again, kind of similar to Spaceman, just never goes deeper. And there's like a 5-star film here about abuse and about like the stresses of trying to be an actor and make it in the entertainment industry, and about even just expectations from family and wanting to make it, and what are you willing to do to make it. That like in our culture of like YouTube and stuff, like of everyone trying to be an influencer and everyone trying to get clicks so desperately, it's so worthy, and instead it's just kind of like a 3-star film that never goes there. But if you're interested by the story, it is an interesting look at what happened. I just think there was more to do here. So that's my
I
two,
I saw a YouTube video about that last year, and it was actually a very good video. I'd have to look what it was and who made it. I didn't know they made a documentary about it. Interesting.
I think it's 5.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was one of those that premiered at TIFF, and I was excited, and then it just like randomly dropped on Hulu, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll watch it. But it's fine.
That's a shame.
Jack, let's hear about the 500 releases you watched this year.
Actually, this is going to surprise you. I've watched 3 films. So there's not... Yeah,
Shocker.
Yeah, usually, Adam, it goes on for about 9 minutes.
Busy lad.
Yeah, I watched... I think I may have mentioned this, but I watched Pale Rider, Clint Eastwood, because I wanted it to be like a High Plains Drifter, and it wasn't. It was just a bit more... it was fine. The other 2, this is where it gets a bit tricky now. I'm in this like big thing where I like to watch alternate versions of films, like fan edits, but I also like director's cut, theatrical cuts, and remastered stuff, and I'm all into that sort of shit at the moment. So I watched, and I don't know why I did. I think I just had it available. I watched the Whole Bloody Affair by the Kill Bill series, which is not the real version because only Tarantino owns that, and he shows it at the Beverly Cinema. So it's literally been stitched together by memory. And taken from multiple different versions of Kill Bill available on the market. So there's a few notable differences. It's 4 hours long. It's 3:58, but Tarantino's is 4:07. So there's a bit more. It starts with a Kinji Fukushima a quote instead of the Klingon one, which was like, thank God for that. And then there's other bits and pieces. So there's a few edits narratively changed. The whole Crazy 88 sequence in Japan or in Tokyo is actually shot in color, which is available on the Japanese Blu-ray. So it's just fascinating to get onto these levels, and it's so much more visceral on color. Watching it in black and white is very much an artistic choice to get past the censors, but watching it in color is absolutely frightening, and it's uncut in Japan. And there's stuff that's not in the original one where it's like she does this thing on the move where she's on the floor and she's like b-boying, like I don't know what the modern term would that be, but like I don't know, dancers do it now. I don't know what it's called. Someone probably correct me if I'm wrong, but she like
twirling.
she like chops like 9 people's legs off and like foots, and it's all there. That was good, and but it's interesting to watch it because I think that like you watch it and you get to a point in the second one where you get to meet David Carradine, and I think David Carradine's got a really good voice, and I think it works very well in the first film. But when you get to him, and then he goes on about the Clark Kent Superman monologue, that gets to the point where I love Tarantino to a certain point, and that's exactly the point where I just lose all interest there. We get to such a pivotal moment, and I don't know if it's subversion or what, but he sort of undercuts his own characters to like mention to the audience, like, I am trendy. Like, how cool is this for a monologue? I also wish it was played by Warren Beatty, and it wasn't shown who he was until the last minute in Mexico. That'd have been so fucking more powerful of having someone in a voice who you know, and you never see him until the end. I don't like that they show David Carradine at all in the second one until the end. So there's a lot of creative choices I don't like, but those are in both films. And then the last one, believe it or not, this is where we're going to go. We're going to fucking really turn up the heat. I don't know why. Also, I watched that Kill Bill with Mum and Dad. My mum loved it. My dad hated it. So we had to choose something a bit more. We had to choose something about manly for my father. So we watched Bad Boys 2. We watched Bad Boys 2 on Netflix.
Let's go!
Yeah, and honestly, not only does that film hold up of how it's shot, like there's an action chase sequence 10 minutes into that film, and then there's lots of bits in that film I never remembered. I think Joe Pantoliano is like really fun, obviously Cypher, and he's in Bound and Sense8 and stuff. So there's a connection I've got there with him. But I think he's fabulous
Sopranos.
in those films. Yeah, Sopranos as well. Yeah, he's outstanding, and they have the same Chevrolet in Bad Boys 2 that's in Matrix Reloaded. I never noticed that. That's just like the real fans out there to get. But there's one thing that really annoyed me in that film where they're driving back from the morgue and one of them's high on ecstasy. You can tell I've never been around those things because I can't say it right. Or maybe that's just a cue for everyone to figure out. But they're driving back in this horrible car, right? And all the lights are green. And I was like, my mom picked up first. I was like, Susan, stop. Like, you're just talking nonsense. And then when I watched it, I was like, oh my God, she's right. And the fucking colour grade is so blue-hued on that film that, yeah, the yellows turn green. And it works because it's like, we're in Miami. But I've never realised how oversaturated and over-colour graded that film actually is. But that film at the end with the Cuban chase, which is stolen straight away from Police Story, which I didn't know until this year because I watched Jackie Chan in general. So it was really wonderful to watch. So I'm going to watch the third one tonight for the first time since I watched it in the cinema before COVID lockdown. So I'm living the dream over to anyone else here. I feel like I've won that one.
Getting ready for Bad Boys Ride or Die coming out this June. I want to say, wow,
I'm absolutely ecstatic. In fact, I can't wait.
Sadly, we won't be doing a ClapperCast for it, but I can't wait.
Nobody was asking for one as well. I
To
don't
hear
think. Yeah.
Let's find where we can find everyone on social media. Nick?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, NickyGrind97, Letterboxd as well. You can watch my films on YouTube and Vimeo at Enjoy the Movies. You can also find Adam's feature film, The Awakening of Lilith, on Prime and on Tubi, at least in the States. I don't know here in Europe. It's not on Italian Prime yet. Go watch it. It's worth your time. Support independent, like actual independent filmmaking.
Jack?
You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd with the username, which is my full name, at Jak-Luke Sharp. There's Jack with no C and Sharp without an E. And you can find me on Clapper with some like mixed reviews of films that no one else wants to talk about, and then some features that are going to come out. I'm trying to get the Psycho one published at least tomorrow.
You can find me on Twitter at pp_movie reviews, Letterboxd just Carson Timar. But of course, you can follow Adam on both Letterboxd and Facebook. They have a number of feature films available currently on Prime and Mubi. A great guest and one I'm sure we'll be having back on the podcast before too long. Thank you, Adam. And again, I apologize to everyone involved for these technical difficulties. Unfortunately, recording on the internet, that is something that sometimes happens. At least it's not as embarrassing as that one episode. I forget if I fully mentioned it. There was one episode way back I was recording with Paul Price, and I just didn't click record for 45 minutes. We were doing an episode, and I looked up and I was like, oh, I probably need to click record. But it happens. Again, I'm sorry, Adam, and I hope this episode was still good enough for everyone who listened, because I think it was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today, and thank you, everyone, for joining us both on the podcast and off of it. Mother is a very special film, I think, and of course, happy Mother's Day to everyone celebrating. We'll be back later this week for our review of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. We have a few special guests joining that I think you'll really appreciate for that episode. There will also be a special announcement on that episode. I teased that before and I'm teasing it again. There's going to be a very fun announcement, so keep an eye out for that. And then later this month on Patreon, we will be back to have our James Whale special. We are reviewing Gods and Monsters and The Old Dark House, celebrating James Whale after our Halloween special, where we kind of fell back in love with his work as a filmmaker. So with that, thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and supporting us here on the podcast. We love you, and we'll see you later this week. Goodbye.